It wasn't the howl that terrified me. It was the way it was followed by a second, identical howl from just behind my tree. Nightbound Bloodline presents 5 true deep woods horror stories. Every map has its blank spaces, those areas marked only by contour lines and the words uncharted wilderness. We tell ourselves these places are empty, but the truth is, we are the visitors there. The stories you are about to hear come from those blank spaces. They are first-hand accounts from hikers, hunters, and foresters, ordinary people who walked into the green shadows and came back forever changed. They entrusted us with their experiences, and we present them to you now, not as campfire tales, but as warnings from the dark. Listen closely. Our first story comes from a man who went into the Uinta-Wasatch National Forest to find peace, and instead found a predator that defied every law of nature he knew. He calls his account, The Man in the Pine Stand. Story 1. The Man in the Pine Stand. What you are about to hear is a first-hand account sent to us by a lifelong hunter. He asked to remain anonymous, but he needed to share his story. He insists, as we do, that what he encountered was real. My name is David. I'm 42 years old, and I've been a certified welder for going on 20 years. I'm a guy who works with steel and fire. I deal in facts, in things I can measure and touch. I don't believe in ghost stories. I don't watch horror movies. And before that weekend in October, I would have laughed if you'd told me something like the Dogman was real. I'm a see it to believe it kind of person. Or I was. I'd driven up to the Uintas for a solo bow hunting trip. It was my annual ritual, a chance to get away from the noise of the city and the shop. My wife had packed me a lunch, kissed me goodbye, and I'd headed out before dawn. The forest was soaked. A cold, persistent drizzle had been falling since I'd left the truck, and everything was dripping. The air smelled incredible, that clean, wet scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was dead quiet, the way it only gets when a heavy rain muffles everything. No birds, no squirrels, just the pat-pat-pat of water on my hood and the soft squelch of my boots in the duff. I'd been tracking a decent-sized mule deer for about an hour, following a faint game trail along a ridge, when I got this feeling. You know the one. The feeling that the number of eyes in the woods had just increased by 1. I stopped, my bow held tight. I listened. Nothing but the rain. I chalked it up to pre-hunt jitters and kept moving, but the feeling didn't go away. It intensified. That's when the smell hit me. It was downwind, carried on a sudden gust. It wasn't a dead animal, not exactly. It was musky, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else. Something rancid, like old meat and copper. It was a physical presence in the air, so thick it made my eyes water. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Bear, I thought. A grizzly, maybe, though they're rare there. I nocked an arrow, my hands suddenly slick inside my gloves. I scanned the trees, my breath pluming in the cold air. The pines were thick, their trunks like a wall of vertical lines in the gray light. And that's when I saw it. About 80 yards down the slope, standing perfectly still in a small stand of younger pines, was a figure. My first rational thought was another hunter, but the shape was all wrong. It was tall, impossibly tall, 7, maybe 8 feet, and it was standing upright on 2 legs, but it was hunched over, with its long arms hanging almost to its knees. It was covered in fur, not the shaggy coat of a bear, but a shorter, wet-looking, gray and black fur that was plastered to its body by the rain. I froze, my finger resting on the bowstring. I couldn't make out a face, not from that distance, but I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its focus like a physical weight. Then it moved. It didn't turn. It didn't take a step. It just leaned. It tilted its upper body from behind one pine trunk to the next, this smooth, fluid motion that was utterly silent. There was no crunch of twigs, no rustle of leaves. It was like watching a shadow detach itself from one tree and become part of another. That's when the fear truly set in. The primal, gut-churning kind. This was no bear. This was nothing I had ever seen in any book, any documentary. This thing was wrong. It violated the natural order. I broke. I didn't think. I just ran. I abandoned my careful tracking and I crashed through the undergrowth, my bow clutched in one hand, my lungs burning. I could hear it then. Not footsteps, but a different sound. A heavy, rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump keeping pace with me, just off to my left. It was the sound of a fist, a big one, pounding on the trunks of the trees as it ran alongside me. It wasn't trying to hit me. It was hurting me, playing with me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was loping on all fours now, its gait a terrifying hybrid of an ape and a wolf, covering ground with an effortless, powerful grace. Its eyes. I saw its eyes. They were a piercing, hateful yellow, like a wolf's, but set too high on a skull that was canine, but also almost human. There was an intelligence there, a cold, predatory awareness that saw me not as a threat, but as prey. It let out a sound. It wasn't a roar or a howl. It was a low, guttural chuffing noise, a sound of pure menace that vibrated in my chest. I thought of my wife. I thought of my kids. I wasn't going to die in these woods. I veered sharply right, towards the sound of a creek I knew was at the bottom of the ravine. I half ran, half fell down the steep embankment, splashed through the icy water, and scrambled up the other side. I don't know how I made it back to my truck. I was vomiting from adrenaline and terror by the time I reached the gravel road. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I locked the doors and I sat there, in the driver's seat, sobbing and shaking for what felt like an hour. I never went back for my gear. I never went back to those woods. I sold my hunting rifle and my bow the next week. I can't even go on a hike in a local park now without getting panic attacks when the wind shifts a certain way. I know what I saw. I'm a welder. I deal in facts. And the fact is, there is something in those deep, dark woods that doesn't belong in any field guide, and it saw me. It saw me, and it let me go. David's account is one of thousands that describe a creature that walks the line between man and beast. A creature of folklore that, for those who have encountered it, is terrifyingly real. But the deep woods hold more than one kind of terror. Our next story comes from a pair of hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail who learned that some paths are not meant to be walked twice. It is called The Trail That Wasn't There. Story 2, The Trail That Wasn't There. The following is a joint statement from two experienced backpackers, Lena Petrova and Ben Carter. They are both geology graduate students, people who trust in the tangible, the measurable layers of the earth. What they found on a routine survey hike defied all measurement. My name is Lena. Ben and we were mapping a section of the PCT in Northern California for our thesis. We're geologists. We trust rocks. We trust maps. The world, for us, is a puzzle that can be understood with the right data. We'd been on the trail for 5 days, and it was our last full day before heading back to the trailhead. The weather was perfect. Sunny, but not too hot. We were in high spirits, joking around, talking about the pizza we were going to devour when we got back to civilization. We'd stopped for a water break on a high ridge. That's when Ben pointed it out. A side trail, branching off from the main PCT and descending into a steep, lush valley we hadn't noticed on our maps. It was a beautiful, well-defined path, carpeted in soft pine needles. It looked inviting. I'm Ben. I saw it first. It was odd, because our topo maps and our GPS didn't show any trails in that drainage. But it was so clear, so well maintained. We figured it was a new trail, maybe cut by a local hiking club. The map just hadn't been updated. It made sense at the time. We decided to be spontaneous. A little detour. An adventure. The moment we stepped onto that path, the air changed. It got still. Not just quiet, but dead. The bird songs from the main trail vanished, like someone had thrown a switch. The light changed, too. It became a muted, greenish gold, filtering through the canopy in a way that felt thick, heavy. The air smelled sweet, cloyingly sweet, like rotting flowers and damp, rich earth. It was pleasant at first, Then it became nauseating. We'd only been walking for about 10 minutes when I noticed the first marker. It was a cairn, a stack of rocks. But the stones were a type of shale I'd never seen in that region. They were jet black and veined with a bright, almost phosphorescent green mineral. I took a picture, but when I looked at the screen, it was just a blurry gray smudge. We brushed it off. Camera glitch. That's when we saw the first tree. A massive, ancient cedar. Its trunk was twisted in a perfect spiral, like a corkscrew. And nailed to it, about head height, was a piece of rusted iron, bent into a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a hook or a question mark drawn with angry, jagged lines. It felt intentional, a warning. We should have turned back then. But our curiosity, our academic minds, pushed us forward. Just a little further, we thought. See what's around the next bend. The bends kept coming. The trail began to feel wrong. It was too perfect. The turns were gentle. The grade was consistent. It was like walking on a designed pathway in a park, not a wilderness trail. And it started to feel longer than it should be. We checked our GPS. The screen was flashing, the coordinates nonsensical, jumping from one set of numbers to another before settling into error. My compass needle was spinning in a slow, lazy circle. The silence was the worst part. It was a pressure on our eardrums. We started talking in whispers, afraid to break it. That's when we heard the first sound. It was a low, rhythmic scraping, like a heavy stone being dragged over bedrock. It was coming from up ahead, around the next curve. We froze. The scraping stopped. Then, from much, much closer, just off the trail to our right, we heard a dry, rattling breath. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of lungs that hadn't drawn air in a very, very long time. We didn't speak. We just looked at each other, and the same primal terror was in both our eyes. Run. We turned and sprinted back the way we came. The trail, which had been so welcoming on the way in, now felt like a trap. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for us. The sweet smell was now overpowering, making us gag as we ran. We ran for what felt like miles, our lungs on fire, expecting to feel a cold, stone hand on our shoulders at any second. We burst out of the tree line and found ourselves right back on the main PCT. We collapsed, gasping, clutching each other. The sun was bright, the birds were singing, the world was normal again. We looked back. There was no side trail, just an unbroken wall of dense, impenetrable undergrowth and trees. We scrambled to our feet and practically ran the remaining 8 miles to the car. We never told our advisors. They would have thought we were crazy. But we know. We took a trail that wasn't on the map, and something on that trail knew we were there. We still have nightmares about the smell of rotting flowers and the sound of that scraping stone. We don't trust maps anymore, because they only show you the world that wants to be found, a path that appears only to lead the unwary astray, a reminder that the oldest forests have their own geography, their own rules. But not all terrors are so subtle. Some are as brutal and direct as a hammer blow. Our third story comes from a logging camp in the remote stretches of British Columbia. The men there called it the thing that broke the trees. Story 3, the thing that broke the trees. Narrator, this account was provided by Mark R. He was a crew chief for a logging operation north of Prince George for 15 years. He has handled chainsaws, heavy machinery, and men with tempers as rough as bark. He is not a man easily frightened. What he and his crew witnessed over 3 nights in the winter of 2018 changed that. Name's Mark. I ran a logging crew up in BC for a decade and a half. You learn a thing or two in those woods. You learn respect for the timber, for the weather, for the isolation. My crew was 20 men, tough as nails, every one of them. We'd seen bears, moose, the works. We weren't spooked by the dark. But this was different. It was February, bitter cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and sets up shop. We were working a new cut block, way out in the backcountry. The first night, we heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist. It was deep. So deep you felt it in your teeth more than you heard it. A heavy crack, like a giant snapping a full-grown cedar over its knee. Then another, and another. It was moving, circling the perimeter of our camp. We all came out of our bunks, standing in the snow with our rifles, staring into the black. Our floodlights didn't pierce far enough. You could just see the tree line, a wall of pure darkness. And in that darkness, something was breaking trees. Not cutting them, breaking them, violently. The next morning, we went out to look. It was humbling. These weren't fallen trees. They were shattered, pulverized. Stumps 6 feet tall, splintered like they'd been hit by a wrecking ball. The trunks were thrown around like pickup sticks, some of them snapped into 3 or 4 pieces. No machine on earth could have done that. No bear, no moose. This was raw, brute force on a scale I couldn't comprehend. The second night, it came back. Closer this time. The crack was louder, the vibration stronger. We could hear it moving through the woods. It wasn't a graceful sound. It was a clumsy, brutal, crashing noise, like it didn't care what was in its way. And then, we heard the vocalization. It wasn't a roar. It was a low, guttural, rumbling sound. A groan of pure, simple exertion, like the sound a mountain might make if it was trying to stand up. It was the most primitive sound I've ever heard. It froze the blood in my veins. My men, these tough, grizzled loggers, had fear in their eyes I'd never seen before. We were just ants. We knew it. On the third night, it didn't just circle. It came to the edge of the clearing. The floodlights caught a piece of it. A shadow. A massive, hulking silhouette that stood at least 12 feet tall at the shoulder. It was bulk, pure and simple. No discernible shape of a head, just a mound of shadow atop a mountain of a body. And it was covered in something. Not fur. It looked like matted, frozen moss and bark, like it was part of the forest itself. It stood there for a full 10 seconds, and the sound it made then was the worst of all. It was a deep, wet, grinding sound, like boulders being ground together in its chest. Then it turned, and with another earth-shaking crack, it vanished back into the trees. We didn't wait for morning. We packed what we could into the trucks, and we got the hell out of there. We left behind hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment. The company wrote it off as a bear attack, a freak weather event, anything to avoid the truth. I quit the next week. I run a hardware store in a small town now. I haven't set foot in the deep woods since. I know what I saw wasn't an animal. It was a force, a thing that breaks trees for reasons I will never understand. And I pray to God I never hear that sound again. A force of nature that is anything but natural. A being of pure, mindless destruction. But the woods can also hold a more ancient, more intelligent evil. An evil that watches and waits and mimics. Our fourth story was sent to us by a family who learned that sometimes the most terrifying sound in the world is the voice of a loved one, calling from a place they cannot possibly be. They call it Story 4, The Mimic in the Maple Grove. This account comes from Sarah and Tom Jennings and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They were camping in a state park in the Adirondacks, a place they had visited many times before. It was a trip meant to build happy memories. Instead, it showed them how fragile those memories can be. My name is Sarah. We're a normal family. Tom's an accountant. I'm a teacher. We're not adventurers. This was our 3rd year at the same campsite, Site 17, nestled right at the edge of a beautiful old maple grove. Lily loved it. She called it her fairy forest. The first day was perfect. We set up camp, made hot dogs, told stories by the fire. We put Lily to bed in the tent around 8, and Tom and I stayed up for another hour, just enjoying the quiet. It started around 10. We were cleaning up, dousing the fire, when we heard it. A voice from the dark of the maple grove. It was Lily's voice. Clear as day. She called out, "Mommy." My heart jumped. I turned to Tom, confused. Is she sleepwalking? I called back, "Lily? Sweetie, are you okay?" I'm Tom. I shone my flashlight towards the tree line. Nothing. Just those tall, dark trunks. Then the voice came again. "Mommy, I'm scared. I'm over here." It was her voice. The exact same pitch, the same little lisp she had when she was tired. But it was wrong. It was flat, like a recording played back with the emotion stripped out. There was a hollow quality to it. I took a step towards the trees, my mother's instinct screaming at me. Tom grabbed my arm. "She's in the tent, Sarah." He was right. We both turned and looked at our tent. The silhouette of our sleeping daughter was perfectly visible through the nylon, curled up in her sleeping bag. She was right there. But the voice from the woods called again, now with a hint of a whine. "Mommy, please. It's dark." That's when the fears set in. A cold, slick feeling in my gut. This wasn't a person. This wasn't an animal. This was something that had listened to us, learned her voice, and it was trying to use it. I yelled into the darkness, my voice shaking. "Who's there? Leave us alone." The response was instantaneous, and it changed. The voice lost all pretense of being Lily. It dropped into something lower, guttural, a wet, rasping parody of a human voice. It spoke our names. Sarara. Tum. It dragged the syllables out, tasting them. Then it let out a sound I can only describe as a choked, rattling laugh. It was the most blasphemous sound I have ever heard. We scrambled into the tent, zipping it shut, clutching a terrified and now awake Lily between us. We sat there in the dark, huddled together, listening. For hours, it circled our camp. We could hear its footsteps, a slow, shuffling sound, like something dragging one foot. It would stop, and we could hear its ragged breathing right outside the thin nylon wall. It would whisper things. It whispered things about our lives, little details it couldn't possibly know. It mentioned the name of our dog, Buster, who had died the previous year. It whispered, the teacher grades in red ink. I felt like I was going insane. It never showed itself. It never touched the tent. It just tormented us. It was playing with us, showing us how utterly powerless we were. The worst part was the smell. A sweet, coppery smell, like old blood and honey, that seeped into the tent. We didn't sleep. We just sat there, holding each other, praying for dawn. When the first gray light finally filtered through the trees, the sound stopped. The smell faded. We waited another hour, just to be sure. Then we burst out of that tent, threw everything, into the car haphazardly, and sped out of there. We didn't care about the deposit. We didn't care about our gear. We haven't been camping since. Lily has night terrors. She says the copycat man talks to her in her dreams. We know what we heard. Something in those woods wears the voices of children like a skin, and it uses them to lure you away from the firelight. We will never, ever forget the sound of our daughter's voice, calling from the darkness where our daughter was not. A predator that hunts not with tooth and claw, but with memory and love. It is a violation of the soul. For our fifth and final story, we journey to the most remote wilderness of all, the one within. This is an account from a solo backpacker who sought solitude and found something else staring back at him from the silent places. He titled his story simply, The Silence in the Snow. Story 5, The Silence in the Snow. Narrator. This final testimony comes from a man named Elias. An experienced solo backpacker, he ventured into the Boundary Waters canoe area in Minnesota during a deep winter freeze, seeking the ultimate peace of a world locked in ice. He found a silence so absolute, it became a presence itself. My name is Elias. I've been a solo backpacker for 15 years. I'm a software engineer. I spend my life surrounded by noise, server hum, keyboard clicks, the city. I go into the wild to find quiet. True quiet. I thought I knew what silence was. I was wrong. I'd been in the Boundary Waters for 3 days. It was the tail end of a cold snap, temperatures hovering around 20 below. The world was frozen in place. There was no wind, no birds. The snow was a thick, sound-absorbing blanket. At first, the silence was a blessing, a relief. But on the third afternoon, as I was setting up camp on the shore of a frozen lake, the silence changed. It deepened. It became more than an absence of sound. It became a substance. It had weight. It pressed in on my eardrums, a physical pressure that made me swallow just to hear something, anything. I found myself holding my breath, terrified of the sound it would make. That's when I noticed the tracks. They weren't animal tracks. They were bare human footprints. They started at the tree line and led out onto the frozen lake, disappearing into the white expanse. But they were wrong. The toes were too long, splayed out like claws. The arches were impossibly high, and they were fresh. I was completely alone out there. I had seen no one for days. A primal fear, colder than the ice under my feet, gripped me. I scanned the lake, the trees. Nothing. Just that crushing, absolute silence. I hurried into my tent, zipping the door shut, trying to block it out. But the silence was inside with me. It was in my head. That night, I woke up. The temperature had plummeted further, and the silence was gone. It had been replaced by a sound so faint I almost missed it. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like a fingernail gently dragging itself across the outside of my tent. Back and forth, back and forth. It was circling. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The scratching stopped right by the door. Then a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone. It was the sound of the silence itself, given a voice. It didn't speak words. It spoke emptiness. It was a void of sound that promised a void of being. It whispered my insignificance. It showed me, in that moment, that I was just a fleeting, warm speck in an ancient, frozen, and utterly indifferent universe. I don't know how long it stayed there. Time lost all meaning. I just sat frozen in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent wall, feeling that thing on the other side, feeling its cold, patient emptiness seeping through the nylon. I think I passed out from sheer terror. I woke to the gray light of dawn. The scratching was gone. The silence was back, but it was just normal silence now. The pressure was gone. I burst out of my tent, my gear forgotten. I just started walking. I walked for hours across the frozen lakes, not caring about direction, only wanting to put distance between me and that campsite. I made it out. I don't know how. I was hospitalized for severe frostbite on 2 of my toes. They had to be amputated. A small price. I don't go into the woods anymore. I can't even stand the quiet of my own apartment. I have to have a fan running, or music, something to fill the space. Because I know now that the deepest silence isn't empty. It's a canvas. And something out there, something in those ancient, frozen places, uses it to paint its own terrible portrait. And it was looking at me. 5 stories. 5 encounters with the unknown that lurks in the deep, dark corners of our world. From a creature of flesh and nightmare, to a path that shouldn't exist, a force of mindless destruction, a mimic that preys on our deepest bonds, and finally, a silence that speaks. These are not mere stories. They are warnings, fragments of a truth we are not meant to fully comprehend. They remind us that the old maps were right to mark the wilderness with dragons. We may have changed the names, but the territories remain. They are still there, waiting in the shadows between the trees, under the cold light of the moon. If you have a story of your own, a brush with the unexplained that haunts your waking hours, we invite you to share it in the comments below. Your experience may be the key that helps another sleepless soul understand they are not alone. If you found yourself gripped by these accounts, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next descent into the dark. This has been Nightbound Bloodline. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.